All right, guys, we're going to get started. It's about 10 minutes after. Hey, guys, we're going to get started. Oh, I've got my teacher voice. I'm afraid they don't want to hear. Plus, I use my teacher voice all day with children that don't listen to me. So I'm going to make a quick announcement before Michelle gets started. I know I had sent an email about if you're interested in ordering a piece of Master Naturalist apparel or whatever from the website that Evan would take your money on Saturday. He didn't come on Saturday and he is not here again today. So I will take your money. I don't have change or anything. I told everybody to kind of have the money that they needed. So there is shipping and stuff. So if you want to donate $1 or $2 to shipping, that's fine. I will take it during the break. Be mindful on the website. If it says out of stock, don't ask me for it. Like the things I want are all out of stock right now, unfortunately, but take a look to see if it's out of stock or not before you ask us to order it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you take like Venmo, Zelle, or PayPal?
The email said cash, so we're just going to do cash because Evan's going to do it. Dylan, I don't think he has Venmo. I can text him and ask him though when I get done. So during break, I will take your money and your orders, and then he'll make his order. And then we will introduce Michelle Villafranca. She is the one who's going to be talking to us today about Prairie. So Michelle, it's all yours.
Okay, so I apologize anyone who's online. You're just going to see probably the top of my head on the wall behind me. So my name is Michelle Villafranca. Thank you for the compliment on the dress. I actually intentionally wore this dress with butterflies because I'm talking about prairies, and prairies are all about pollinators, right? So I wanted to fit the theme. I used to work here at the Nature Center, and before that, I worked as a forester for the city. I did a lot of conservation jobs. Now I'm in the Parks Department as a park operations planner. But prairies has always been my love, even when I was a forester and I was advocating for trees. I still on the side like really loved grasses and wildflowers. So that's kind of what brought me to give a prairie presentation, which I'm giving now.
There it is.
So
barely, but it's coming.
Yeah, so we'll just wait a second for this to kind of warm up because I have such pretty pictures. So is anyone else like a big nerd for prairies, or do you want to admit it or not admit it? Okay, there's a couple of people that are. Okay, wildflowers, who likes wildflowers? Okay, if you don't like wildflowers, like, so my goal is maybe not by the end of this presentation, hopefully by the end of this presentation, we'll have more converts, but if not, then by the end of our prairie field trip, I hope to have converted a couple of more people to be as enthusiastic about prairies as I am. So did you say this works?
Yeah. It should just plug into the USB.
I don't think the USB is connected yet. I really don't know how to use these things anyways, to be honest. I will say that Michelle converted me last year. Now I love her. Get ready. I guess I can just go. Oh. You can like put the next one here.
I think it's there we go.
Okay. Maybe is it delayed?
No, I think I just need to click on the actual presentation to get it
Oh, there, okay. So before I get completely started, if anyone wants to interrupt me, please do, because I can just go on and on and on and on, and it would be nice to be interrupted, so I would very much appreciate it. Okay, so y'all probably know the basics about prairies, but you can't, in my opinion, really give a presentation on prairies without talking about, you know, the fact that it's the largest biome on the planet, and it's the most altered biome or ecosystem. And now, at least in the US, it's only covering about 1% of the US. And so on this map, you just have the peak, which is tall grass prairie. The middle is the mixed grass prairie, which is we're kind of like in a transition zone. We're mostly in mixed grass prairie here, but we're at that transition zone. And then the yellow is short grass prairie.
Sorry, I clicked on the Zoom again. It's my fault.
What's considered long? Or is it like, is it actual measurement? Or is it like just what's considered long?
Oh, tall grass prairie. It's just taller grass.
It's just taller.
So yeah, it's based on moisture. So tall grass prairies require more moisture. They're growing in areas of the US that get more moisture than we do here. So that's why we're kind of transitioning here. And so that was a good lead question into this. So I have some photos of short grass prairie, like Ponza Prairie up in Kansas, mixed grass prairie, which is here. That was a picture from Weiss County. And then you have savanna, which is here. Y'all probably seen it on your forest field trip, the post oak savanna, and then short grass prairie out in the panhandle. And I thought this quote was really nice. The wealth of the tall grass prairie was its undoing. So basically, to me, that's really poetic in a sad way, because tall grass prairie is just so, it enriches the soil and has such diversity and life in the soil that it created a great area for farming. So what are factors that define prairies? One of them is geology. So I'm kind of starting at the bottom, right, and moving my way up. Geology is your basis for anything, for forests, for tundra, for prairies. And so in this area, this, I don't know if this has a pointer. Yes, right there. That's just down the road, going towards Azle off of 199. And it's a cliff. It's probably 15 or 20 feet, but it shows several layers of geology that are exposed. And so like this top part is actually a Kiamichi layer. And then down here, I think it was Biloxi, maybe somewhere down there, which is sandy. But geology in this area is based on marine deposition. So when we were covered by an inland Cretaceous sea, you would have had shallow and deep seas when it was receding or advancing, when the water was receding or advancing. And within the sea, you have creatures that are secreting calcium carbonate. So when they die, their bodies are accumulating at the bottom, and they're actually creating limestone for later. We're also subject to erosion from the Rocky Mountains. So whenever you have the laramide orogeny, when the Rocky Mountains were formed, the inland sea kind of shifted, and then it started retreating to where present day Gulf of Mexico is. So it kind of moved across. And with the erosion of the Rockies, once they lifted, then everything on this side of the continental divide is eroding this way. It's eroding east. And then rivers are carrying it. Then we have deposition. So that's from the rivers. They're depositing, or even from oceans. But in this area, like the Trinity River, or any of our streams that are flooding, they're depositing that silt that they've collected further upstream. And then you have contemporary erosion. So all of that to say that ancient events, they're setting the stage for what we see today. And the geology of north central Texas is that sedimentary deposition. So it's like the gravel, sand, silt, clay, and the marine calcium carbonate. And I thought this was really interesting. This was at the Nature Center in a very deep, deep hole somewhere on site. And it was like a cliff wall that was about 50 feet. And I crawled down in there before it all got kind of filled back in. And you can see a contact surface for geology. So right there you have like the fine sand, which I'm thinking is in the meander of the Trinity River. So it would have more than likely been deposition from the ancient Trinity River, like a sandbar. And then this would have been likely the gravel bar. So when you look at the inside and outside of the sinuosity of streams, where on the corner, you know, when they're turning, they're dropping gravel, and then the finer things drop out later in the water column. I think you probably covered this in some of your other classes, which is the soil triangle. So I won't go into that, but soil, which is based on geology, is also based on plants because plants are breaking down, creating soil. That is defining what is growing on it. So, and this is kind of hard to read, but I got this out of the Roadside Geology of Texas book, which whenever I go on road trips, I carry that book with me, which is really antiquated now with cell phones or smartphones, but I love that book. Carry it with me, read about geology everywhere I go. So here you have, they're calling this the Eastern Timbers. Then you have the Blackland Prairie, somewhere up in here, which I don't even see it labeled as a post oak savanna, and it comes down on this side of Blackland Prairie. Then you have a tiny little strip right there, which is the Eastern Cross Timbers. Grand Prairie, which they're calling Grand Prairie, is the Fort Worth Prairie, and I'll talk about it later. And then Western Cross Timber. So if you look on Texas Parks and Wildlife, on their, I think their ecosystems webpage or something, they kind of lump this whole area together as Cross Timbers and Prairies region, but they're just kind of, they're not splitting hairs, but I like to split hairs. So again, soil, this is another thing that defines prairies, and it's alive. So I read this book, and it's been a couple of years, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's about prairies. And Candace Savage, she's like so poetic in her book. She's a really good author. But she had like almost every page you turn, she's talking about something that just, well, for me, made my head want to explode. And so one of the things that I took from that book is that a single teaspoon of soil holds maybe around 5 billion microbes. So that's saying a lot. So when we, well, I had a volunteer who worked at the greenhouse with me, and he would not allow anyone to use the word dirt. He said, yes. Do you work at, yes. Are you Linda?
I'm Shannon.
Okay, sorry. So are you volunteering over there?
Yeah.
Okay. So you know, like you cannot say dirt because dirt means like what you get on the bottom of your shoes. Soil is something that's alive. So don't disrespect soil. Another thing that defines prairies is, I'm gonna move to this side, is wind. So in this area, wind isn't, you know, this part of Texas or the Southern Great Plains, wind isn't like a huge factor for defining prairies, although it does desiccate the plants. But up in like Nebraska and the areas that were glaciated at the turn of the last ice age, you would have had a combination of glaciers retreating and then winds scraping up that really finely ground down loess from the glaciers to build sand dunes. What really defines prairies though is precipitation. So on this map, again, that's from the Roadside Geology of Texas. And it's just basically showing, and this has probably changed a lot with our recent climatological events that, you know, drought and all of that. But typically East Texas is going to get about 56 inches of rain. Southeast Texas, and by the time you get to the Panhandle, it's 16. And then in the Sky Islands of far West Texas, you could get down to like 12 and 14 inches of rain a year. So the area we're in is about 28 on the kind of western side of the DFW Metroplex, like Mineral Wells and over that way. and to the east, so it's about 28 to 32 inches average. And so this is just an example of like if you're in the southeast US, you get more rainfall, you have deciduous forests. As you're coming westward, you're getting into like post oak savanna, the cross timbers area. Then you get into the Great Plains, you're getting into tall, mixed, and then short grass prairie. Then with less and less precipitation as you move west, you get to the desert. And then you get to California. California is its own thing, right? It's like influenced by the Pacific, and it has the topography to make it have all kinds of things in California. So drought is a normal thing for prairies. It also is normal for the cross timbers forests. But you know, we always say like by July of this year, like in the Parks Department, we're like, oh my gosh, like this drought is actually really getting really bad because we're concerned about fire in some of our natural areas. But for prairies, drought, it ain't no big deal, right? That's just part of its ebb and flow. In 2011, we had 14.8 inches of rain, but the statewide average was in the 40s, I think. So it was not a normal year. Well, then we just kind of relived it this year. We were getting, this is a more recent, that was as of mid-August, drought map, which shows that Dallas-Fort Worth was in the exceptional drought category. And that means like you're starting to have crop failure, you're having cracks in the soil, you're having fires that are starting. Everything's just like really extreme. And then, oh yeah, and then 2015, that was kind of our drought buster. I remember driving home from here. I was working here in 2015. And at my house, it rained like, I think we totaled out at like 17 inches. So by the time I left here and got home, I had to take 3 routes to get home because every road I took was flooded. And I barely got to my house. I thought I was going to have to like leave my car and hike, trespass through people's property to get to my house. And once the water receded just a little bit, I live on a county road, the asphalt had risen up. It like the whole layer of asphalt like rose up and then dropped back down. Yes, it just rained and rained and rained, and like some roads were just closed. Like the route that I took to come to work was closed for a couple of months, so I had to drive way out of the way. So y'all remember that if you lived in Texas, you are probably very familiar with that. Another thing that defines prairies is fire. And again, we saw that this summer, that places that you wouldn't normally think would burn, like, now I'm blanking out on the town, over by Dallas, where there was like a field next to some homes. Yeah, Balch Springs, yes, thank you. I didn't get enough sleep last night, so my brain is so that normally in a normal year, the grass would be green. It wouldn't be such a big deal, but because everything was drought stress and the weather conditions, people lost their homes because of it. So wildfires, they're fueled by these drought conditions and cured vegetation. In that case, these things were dormant in the middle of the summer, which isn't normal. And then grasses. So always use like prairies for people to appreciate prairies. It's always the wildflowers that are the hook, right? Because we think of Texas bluebonnets and we think of driving through the hill country and oh, it's so beautiful. But really the basis of a prairie is grass. But the proverbial we, like society, we don't like grass, right? We see grass, we want to mow it. Grass, if it's like 3 inches, we got to mow it, which really hurts your wildflowers. And also people don't think that, just like a forest, which y'all probably learned in your forest ecosystem program, that forests have vertical structure. So you have like your duff layer and your understory and your pole and your overstory trees. That's making all of these niches for different animals and plants to live in, prairies have the same thing. And then you can't have prairies or really anything without pollinators. Hence my dress. I don't have a bee dress, so I had to wear a butterfly dress. But did you know that Texas has about, I think about 700, hope I'm not wrong about that, I've forgotten, bee species, or there are 700 bee species, and most of them are solitary. So like honeybees, those are colonial bees. They form colonies and live communally. But most of your bees, your bumblebees, your solitary bees, they're just hanging out by themselves or in small groups living in different little holes. And then 18 of the bees are on Texas Parks and Wildlife species of greatest conservation need. And so, 95% of the species, or the invertebrates, comprise 95% of the species on Earth. And then, of course, because we don't really know all of them and we're rapidly destroying all the habitat, who knows, what the real number is and what the real number will be in 50 years after we've done more to the planet. But this is just, my yard is native landscaping, from plants from prairies mostly. And in good years, when I would get home from work, I would just take pictures. I just walk around my yard and take pictures. So these are just some of the, probably 50 or more species that are living in my yard on native plants. And y'all probably know E.O. Wilson. He's a famous biodiversity scientist, and he studied ants and all kinds of things, and died not too long ago. But he said if all of mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos. So if humans are gone, the world will rebound. But if you take insects out of the picture, you're not going to have pollination other than wind pollination. And plants will really have to re-evolve, and all the species that depend on those plants and those insects will have to start kind of from scratch. So another thing, factor that defines prairies are bison. And so bison are a keystone species of the prairie. And I think y'all had a mammalogy presentation, I think last week. And I think you mentioned bison. But anyways, their hooves are stimulating growth, they're grazing, and their saliva when they're grazing on grass stimulates growth. Their hooves are aerating the soil. It's also preparing the seed bank for all the seeds that fall into where the bison have stepped. And of course, their wallows provide these ephemeral temporary wetlands for other species. They add nutrients to the soil, and they change the fire regime. So here at the Nature Center, the pastures are really too small, so they get overgrazed. So you're not really changing you're changing the fire regime in the pastures, because fire's not going to carry unless you pull the bison off and let some things grow. But thinking landscape scale, like if you went to Conza Prairie or you go somewhere where there are thousands and thousands of acres, then bison are changing how fire moves through the environment based on their grazing. That's like a whole science to itself. But then there are other grazers. So prairie dogs actually nibble down all the vegetation around their dens. And they're also a keystone species. And then black-footed ferrets, their historic range was all here. It came into Texas. They're basically following the prairie dogs because their diet is the prairie dogs. But we had kind of an all-out assault on prairie dogs. Basically, our government back in 1924 just said, oh, they're pests, we should kill them all. It's not going to make a difference. It will be great if the world is rid of prairie dogs. But then with that, you're losing, burrowing owls and their habitats. Snakes use their dens. The black-footed ferret got down to, I think, like 18 18 individuals existed, period, in the world. And we thought that they were extinct until some ranchers found them up in, I think it was Montana. And that's what kind of started the program to have captive breeding of the black-footed ferrets. And then I also include other species as grazers that are affecting the prairies, like the water bears that are in the soil, and they're nibbling on plant roots, and the springtails, which I think that's like amazing that, again, a square yard of topsoil could have 15,000 of these little microscopic creatures. And then of course, grasshoppers. We had a grasshopper researcher that came to the Nature Center probably 5 years ago, and she was just doing like a quick survey, sweep netting. She had some students with her, and she found just in like an hour or something, 15 or so species of grasshoppers just on the prairies here. So there's an amazing diversity of grasshoppers, and they don't all eat grass. Some of them eat forbs. So if you had a fire and you had grasshoppers that are specializing in grass, they could come back if they didn't die. Say they flit away, get away from the flames, they could be back there in like a couple of days when you get the resprout of the grass. But grasshoppers that feed on forbs, so not grass, that could take, a fire could take away their food source for, you know, the rest of the season. So it's just, I don't know, so many things to think about. And then one of the interns that was here, his girlfriend was studying, I think for her master's degree at UNT a couple of years ago, and she was studying leafhoppers. I'm like, I didn't even know there was more than like one leafhopper species. And what they're doing is they're drilling into the stems of plants and kind of sucking out the plant juices. But that's why I have this little face, because I'm like, oh my gosh, leafhoppers, like I can't believe, I don't know. Hey, I'm sorry?
They're pretty.
They are. Yeah, and they probably, you know, camouflage in with whatever species they're feeding on. And I'm really glad that y'all are taking Master Naturalist, because y'all are probably the same type of person as me, in that like you could just be outside and you're completely amused by everything. You never get bored. If you're into nature, you will never get bored, because there's just so much to look at and learn. And then of course we have our recent grazers, which are bovine. And then, so those are all the things that that define a prairie. But prairies also have adaptations. So everything has adaptations, right? If it's, you know, creatures in the ocean or in the woods. But prairies really need adaptations, because they're growing short of the desert. They're growing in some of the most harsh environments, because they're just exposed. So everything is invested in the ground, and that's, they have to. And the reason why is because of hail, wind, insect plagues, drought, fire. Forests obviously face some of this too, but the vertical structure of a forest protects everything that's within the forest generally. And they're growing more in areas that have a higher moisture regime. Another adaptation is photosynthesis. So back way a long time ago, millions of years ago, you had only grasses or plants that were C3 photosynthesis. And so those are like cool season grasses. So they're adapted to just being in cooler climates, not so harsh. They're not, you know, doing a lot of control of their stomata. So a lot of their moisture is lost through transpiration. And then at some point, C4 grasses evolved, and those are the ones that are in like this area. So your warm season grasses. So we have cool season and warm season grasses. Cool season is what you see green in the winter, and warm season are the ones that we're seeing that have been seeding like since June or so. And C4 grasses, they're just more efficient because they evolved under those parameters. So their stomata is like having more advanced opening and closing, and opening at night to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide versus in the day in like really hot conditions. They're keeping it kind of closed down so they're not losing a lot of water. And then another adaptation is fire. And so again, this is like your life processes of the prairies or are more underground. They're building the soil, they're investing in the soil. We know that tree roots do that. They hold the soil together, they go all over the place, they go deep, they go wide. But think about if you had a wildfire go through woodlands here, it could be more detrimental to the trees versus going through a prairie that is going to come back. The trees actually, their growing tip is from the top. So if you burn the top part of a tree, it's going to have to start growing from the ground up. And then grasses, they just burn off the top layer and then they're coming back without any trouble. So fires, that's removing the thatch, it's stimulating germination and growth and returning nutrients to the soil. And I just think that's a great phrase, a root-driven ecosystem. And again, the more you learn about prairies, the more you're like, oh my gosh, prairies like really, they had it bad, because you think of the Dust Bowl, you think of farming. We need to farm, obviously, but once you start tilling a place and you just keep tilling it, you're taking out like thousands and thousands and thousands of years of evolution and soil development. And what's in the soil is the rhizosphere, and that's just the root layer and all the nodules and all the microbes that are in the root soil area. And I find this interesting. You can't really read anything, but like I think this end's supposed to be Bermuda grass, and then so there are no roots, right? Because it just sends the rhizomes out and it keeps everything in the top couple of inches. But then some of your other prairie grasses and plants, they have deeper roots. Yeah.
Like, for instance, on these roots, like how many feet or inches?
It was like impossible to read this, but I've read that like some of the tall grasses, so like big blue stem, Indian grass, can have over 12 feet. And so me being a nerd like that, one of our former interns, she came out, she was working for Upper Trinity Groundwater Conservation District, and she was running like an education trailer, and she was like, I want to know how deep, like I really want to know how deep the grass roots go. And I was like, yeah, come on out, we'll dig. It took 3 of us, we only got that far down before we gave up. So we did, I don't know, but I do have a picture coming up of somebody who did that. So we'll see.
Where did you get the last graphic from the last? You know where that
I
came from?
stole it from the internet.
Just
Yeah, just Google it.
Grasslands, and you can find all kinds of pictures that have like.
There's a really neat mural in the other room, the top of it shows all the different groups of swimming.
Yeah, so maybe look at that. The door's open or next time you're here.
That's a popular graphic, though. You'll find it if you look at terms.
Yeah, and I think now the artist or whatever that did it, like, is selling it maybe. Yeah, super popular.
8 to 14 feet. Yeah, that's what
Yeah. So, Packard, he wrote this book. So this, he's like a prairie hero, I don't know, up in Chicago, and he wrote this book with another person, Mattel. And in this book is where I got that information of 65% of the biomass of a prairie is actually below ground. Got that. And then this is this Engelmann daisy. that we got out of the greenhouse, and I didn't realize, like, when I see woman daisies, I don't think they have a massive taproot, but it's a perennial, so you don't always expect taproots from perennials. You expect that more from like annual wildflowers, and that thing was like 5 inches. Like, I could not even believe it. Anyways, here's the picture.
Oh, wow.
I got that off the internet, and I'm sorry I didn't put, normally I have my, where I got it from. Well, like, how did he do that? How did he do that?
Here's another famous picture that they took a cross section.
Oh,
And you can see the actual plants standing next to it. It's like a photograph.
Like they dug a big ditch and he's standing and it's all behind him.
so see, I'm not the only person. And y'all obviously are looking at that too.
There's at least 2 more.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to be a very
Yeah.
Or just
Yeah. Okay, so roots are another adaptation. So you have mutualism, where it's symbiotic with the roots, like with my mycorrhizal fungi, which is extending the capacity. So if you just have a root, if you have fungi on it, that's extending the water collecting capacity, etc. And then root nodules are found on legumes, and they're fixing the nitrogen from the soil that you would get from rain, or maybe some of it's naturally occurring, but I think most of it's coming from rain. So it's sitting in the soil, and the plants cannot access it. So that's what legumes do, is they're taking that nitrogen that's in the soil and they're converting it. And the way they're doing that is because they have nodules, which help them. And then we have soil crust. So hopefully we'll see that, and you may have seen it already on some of your field trips, are the soil crust, the nostoc, and the moss. And basically that's, I'm saying it's the extension of a root system. It's not a root system, but it's kind of acting in that same way. It's holding the soil in place. It's collecting moisture, nutrients, doing an exchange with the soil, and preventing erosion. And then that, yes, is angel snot. So whenever it gets wet, you pick it up. It's like, oh, so you can do a little like. You have to do it with people that don't expect that. So some other adaptations are, in the flowers. And so I always say, well, I mean, most of your awesome flowers, showy flowers, are out in prairies, out in the open. In forests, there are flowers, but to me, it's like, not so exciting. Although trees are flowering also, so that's providing a lot for pollinators. So you're looking at shape, different shapes attract different pollinators. So on this one, the long petal of the primrose attracts beetles because they need to kind of rest on something. They have to rest on the petal when they're stealing pollen or digging in. The color attracts and reflects UV light, which attracts different pollinators. The patterns on flowers, what time they're blooming is important for pollination, and if they have a scent. And then seeds, I'll go through that quick. Some are fire dependent, like bluebonnet seeds. They have a really hard seed casing. So a very light fire could open them up, or like rubbing them on the cement or something, or they need to go through an animal's digestive tract. Surface coat, again, thing. Delayed germination and dormancy. So if you ever order seed and you look on the seed package, it says, 85% germination rate or something, and then there's X that are inert, seeds that aren't going to germinate, or they're going to have delayed germination, and that's an adaptation. And then when pollinated and dispersed, surface texture. So that's animals, it gets caught in animals' fur. So it's animal dispersed. And then this one is in the Euphorbia family. It's a Queen's Delight. There are two species. Anyways, when it desiccates, they'll kind of turn brown and then they explode and they projectile send the seeds out, and then that's how they're getting distributed. So I think it'd be a neat study for someone who has a lot of time to like find the plants and then see the spatial distribution of the plants and see if, you know, it's based on how far the seeds project out. I collected one of those when I first found out about it. I found it on a site when I was in forestry, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I took it to my office and I set it on the desk, not knowing what it was or what it was going to do. And like about a week later, it like exploded, and I was in my office working, and I was like, it like literally like shot across the room and hit the wall. And several of them, and I thought like someone, you know. Anyways, I was ducking under my desk. And then leaves are an adaptation. So you have, you know, folded leaves. You have very padded succulent leaves, like in the cactus. And so other adaptations for animals is they migrate. So maybe they don't want to stay up in whatever, North Dakota for the winter. They come down here, vice versa. So bison would have migrated, cowbirds would have followed the bison, thick thistles, cattle egrets, they're following the food. But now that we have cattle fenced in, a lot of those species aren't migrating like they used to because their food's just there kind of all the time picking up insects. And then binocular and monocular vision. So are the eyes on the side of your head, or if you're a predator, they're up front so you can hunt. And thermoregulation, and I think Nick talked about this. He was talking about the ears and like the size of ears. And then activity in day or night at twilight is an adaptation for really hot prairies. And then you have some that live underground. So unfortunately, that mole was dug up out of my yard by my dog and murdered. But I didn't let that opportunity go to waste as I played with it after my dog was done. Because they're cool. Have y'all seen them like live or dead? They have really cool. And then, you know, some animals are hibernating. So in the winter, they're hibernating, or they're estivating in the summer when it gets really hot. They're just like laying low until conditions change. And then also coloration and camouflage. And then the adaptation for cattle or horses is, you know, their hooves, they have specialized teeth and stomach for eating prairie grasses. So I call cattle our recent prairie megafauna, because they're kind of like the thing that are on prairies now. And I'm about to give y'all a break. So I just wanted to go, I can't go into talking about prairies without taking an even deeper dive back, you know, because it's not just what we see here today. To me, prairies are telling a story. So are forests, but I like prairies. And prairies, I think, are telling more of the story. So I didn't realize this, but back during the Cretaceous, there were these giant dinosaurs that were they were vegetarians, and they were eating fern prairies. And I was like, I've never heard of a fern prairie, but I could see you could call something a fern prairie. Then you have the KT event, which is just basically when the meteor hit down in the Yucatan Peninsula, all across the globe at the certain level, which is the contact level between the eras, is iridium. So it's like a layer of iridium. So it was found, I think, by a father and son, like geologists in Italy. And then after many more geologists studied it, they were like, wow, this is like consistent across the entire globe at this time frame in the geologic layers. There's iridium, and iridium is not really from the earth. It's like such a super rare mineral that is coming from outer space. So what would explain that it would link the theory is, you know, from the Yucatan, the meteor at the Yucatan. So, but when that happened, over time, you would have had just, the skies would have been dark, the climate would have changed because it would have really disrupted, you know, the atmosphere for a long period of time. So then things are dying, the larger animals are dying because the plants are dying, and anyways, you know, the animals that are eating the plants are dying, etc. And what comes back kind of after that is grasses. So it evolved like 60 million years ago. And so what evolved with grasses? I guess somewhere at the end, you know, after the meteorite impact, there were some corporalites, which is fossilized dung of dinosaurs that had grass pollen in it, but mostly they're finding pollen in more recent, like 60 million years onwards to today. And horses evolved. So apparently they were here in what is the US now. They were in kind of North America, what we call North America, and then they migrated, left, whatever, and then they were reintroduced back by the Spaniards. So horses are actually native to here from a long time ago, and their teeth evolved. They evolved with the grass for the silica to eat the grass. And then you would have had other things here. So I don't have, has anyone gone to like the Waco Mammoth Museum or Waco Mammoth site or any of the paleo sites where, yes. So I mean, maybe I shouldn't even spoil it. If you haven't been, you should just go. It's awesome, it's amazing. But it's basically your Ice Age megafauna and what species were here and what species got killed in this catastrophic flood event. Shows you that they were here. So we had Columbian mammoths. We did have on the continent, we had woolly mammoths. I think mostly woolly mammoths were more north. They were more of a forest species, so they were browsing, whereas Columbian mammoths were more savanna grass species. And then the giant ground sloth, which they postulate was eating honey locusts and godards and things that like were like, what's eating that now? Nothing's eating that now. So it must have been the giant ground sloth. And then the short-faced bear, which is like bigger than a polar bear. So these are just some of the animals. And all of these animals were found there at the Waco Mammoth site. And of course, I actually joined the Texas Archaeological Society because, again, like trying to deep dive into just everything history here. And there are a lot of sites. So if I actually am going to have a representative from that organization go on a field trip with us and hopefully interpret some archaeological things for us. But that's like a deep dive into what was here from long ago. But there are bison kill sites. These are some where you would have had paleo people who were running bison off of cliffs. Bison are grassland species. So anyways, that's just all tying that together. And then the more recent history is the Spaniards. They came here, they entered or reintroduced horses. And which Native American tribe really took the horses? Do you want to know? Comanche, yeah. So there's a really good book, Empire of the Summer Moon, that talks about that. Has anyone read that book or read? It's such a good book. But basically in that book, it's talking about Comanches were like the runts, right, of like Native American tribes on the plains. And they were, they just weren't agile. But once they got horses from the Spaniards or by way of the Spaniards, they became very adept at horse riding, and then they dominated the plains. So then they were able to make raids, from San Antonio all the way to Oklahoma in one day. They would, became kind of like that wall for westward migration from Europeans in the 1800s. And back back then in the early 1800s, or by then, 1871, this is an account of bison. So that was their normal range of bison. So you see they go into Mexico. Their range goes into Mexico. It's all the way up into New York, all the way up into Canada. Now they've kind of split off. You have the woods bison that are up in Canada, and then the plains bison pretty much down here. But so this explorer said at least 25 of 34 miles that he went through was just all bison, like as far as you can see, 6 to 10 miles in all directions was just like this writhing movement of bison. So that kind of shows you what most of the US was like. As late as 1871, the place was covered with bison. You have to have prairies to support bison. You cannot have had that many bison without grass. And then these are some other animals that you actually would have found in Texas. But then the railroads came through. You'll probably know your history of the westward movement. The railroads really helped divide up the West. And then the Industrial Revolution helped with that. And then we were hunting bison. For a while, Native Americans would have been like, oh, that's okay. But when they see more and more and more and more people coming, and then they're starting to take that resource, and then they're sending it back on trains to the East Coast, and then that's going over to Europe. I mean, that's the Industrial Revolution made for a quick demise of bison. And then we, as part of our settlement, we got rid of the bison because that got rid of the Indians. And then we brought in cattle and we put up fences. So I just basically summarized it here as basically a war against bison that we had. And there were other reasons. And then the Longhorns came on the Chisholm Trail. Then you had Charles Goodnight, who realized like most of the bison are disappearing. We need to try to save them. And cattle have been the replacement, but Longhorns are pretty hardy, but just cattle in general are needy. And they don't do so well in northern climates unless you can get them to shelter. And then the rest of the settlement brought in plows, because we were subdividing everything into farms. Then you had the Dust Bowl, which was like still one of the greatest environmental disasters or man-made environmental disasters. I'm not going to press click. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, it takes thousands of years to build up that soil through the plants, the decomposition, input from all life forms, but we can destroy it in half a day. So we can destroy it in half a day by plowing it up. We can destroy it in half a day by taking a bulldozer and just pushing everything aside to build our cities. But grasslands are what build soil. So once we destroy that life that's in the soil, you're not going to get it back with compost tea the same way it took thousands of years to get. So I'm going to give y'all a break. I think it's like 7 o'clock. And then do you want to just come back in like, what do y'all normally do? 10 minutes, 5, 3, 10? Okay. Let's come back at 7:15.
All right.
Oh, hi. Yes, I remember you from Prairie Seeker. Prairie I'm just doing a little map because we're actually trying to make sure that all the land all the way around the corner here in the back. I feel like just definitely placing where that might be is probably an area where we right, because there's like a market. Do you happen to know how many acres?
I almost made her pass out. I'm gonna ask them to sit down.
They're on the south side of Villafranca. That sounds amazing. We definitely need to make that connection because I think that the city Yes, I'm like getting all like. Thank you.
Yeah, you need to put that on the site.
Yeah. Yes. So.
Make sure you need a reason.
Could be.
Sorry. Ah, there we go. All right, are we ready? All right, we're gonna get started again.
Can we turn it down a little bit, the lights?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't know we wanted to.
That's pretty dark.
That's too dark, you guys?
Well, I mean, that always, if anyone falls asleep, I won't see. But if someone falls asleep, I might come by and go.
It's the cookies.
Okay, so just getting back into it now, we're just going to talk about the type of prairies you would find in north central Texas. So we'll start from the east. So the Blackland, the Blackland Prairie is vertisol, so that's like shrink swell, which the Blackland Prairie is known for, of like having that clay soil that when it rains, that like gets real mucky and muddy, and then when it dries out, it's cracking. Then you have alpha soils. This is eastern cross timbers and western cross timbers. Alpha soils are sandy soils, and so they're usually sandy soils are more conducive to woods and savannas. And then in the middle, this is Fort Worth Prairie, which is mollisol, which is also a clay soil. It has a lot of rocky limestone outcropping, high organic matter, but so does blackland clay or bird salts. So basically where you see the mollisols, that really is the Fort Worth Prairie, which is also sometimes called the Grand Prairie, but Grand Prairie also kind of just covers like Fort Worth, Blackland, all the way up into Arkansas. So I like to drill down to Fort Worth Prairie as more specific type.
Now, I have a quick question. Is it unusual, like across the country or other parts of the globe, to have such different variations in such a relatively small geography like Dallas Fort Worth? Because it just seems like there's a lot of difference here from east to west. I mean, I live in Weatherford, and it's very different in Weatherford than it is, you know, out in Garland or whatever. And so there's just a lot of difference. And I was just curious looking at this.
That's like a brilliant observation, like really good observation, because just a disclaimer, like I feel like people don't appreciate this area, right? Because like you want to be at the ocean or you want to be in the Rocky Mountains, like somewhere where the beauty hits you in the face. But here it's a subtle beauty with high diversity. And so a lot of different changes. And I don't know the answer to that like elsewhere, but it is based on geology. So if you, again, look at the ancient sea receding, as it receded over time, it's laying down, it's depositing, you know, sand, gravel, limestone, as it's retreating to where the Gulf of Mexico is now. So you can literally look at that, like starting from West Texas, look at the geology and the soils and the plants, and you can just follow that from old West Texas is like Jurassic and whatever, it's like really old. And then as you get in this area, this is Cretaceous. And then as you move to Dallas and beyond, it's more recent geology. So it's all geology. So that's a really good question. Like you and the gold star. I'm going to be thinking about that all the rest of the night.
Doesn't try me.
Yeah, it's like
Challenge, right?
Yeah.
Really try.
yeah, but see, that's what I'm saying. Prairies are like so amazing. There's so much to think about. So this is an old map from let's see. Well, maybe it's not that old. It's based on Dijksterhuis's map, I think, in a geologic survey. But it's basically showing even more broken down geology. But the reason I have it on here is just to talk about Blackland Prairie, Fort Worth, and Cross Timbers, which is denoted in these different colors. And then 29F, which I think is awesome, is the carbonate cross timbers. Has anyone heard of that before? So if you go to the new state park, the Palo Pinto Mountain State Park, it's in the middle of Pennsylvanian geology, so that red cross timber soil of the western cross timbers. And then when you get to that park, there's limestone. It's just like out of nowhere, there's limestone. That's what it is. It's this outcropping in just that very limited area called the carbonate cross timbers. It's not from the Cretaceous. It's actually from during the Pennsylvanian, I believe. So it means Cretaceous is from 120 to 60 million years ago. Pennsylvanian is from like 300 million years ago. So it's even older limestone. So Blackland Prairie, I think everyone's heard of Blackland Prairie. Is really critically endangered. I mean, the World Wildlife Fund is labeling it as critical endangered. So this was a couple of years ago, it was like less than 5,000 acres of Blackland Prairie remained out of 12 million acres. That's unplowed. But with the way DFW is developing, I would say, you know, who knows? There's probably not much of it left at all because it's either farmed and now it's, you know, McKinney. So the interesting thing about Blackland Prairie is this microtopography, which is Mima mounds. And so Mima mounds, they're like these equally distant spaced mounds, and they create this microhabitat. So it's hard to see in the pictures. Yeah, it's like other species, grass is there, then you have, you know, the pincushion there. I forgot to mention, they're alpha soil, so it's on sandy soil. And in this area, it's mostly on the Trinity River, so northeast Texas, the river terraces. And I think there are some meme amounts down on the Gulf Coast of Texas. And there are also some, like here, this is the Palouse grasslands up in Idaho. So they're farming up in Idaho in sandy soils, but look how perfectly evenly distributed they are. And so I don't think scientists ever like fully have said what they think causes it. You can find a lot of things, like I like this one, giant prehistoric gophers, that's the one I want to believe, but I also like the Lake Worth monster and believe that he's like a real thing. Then, or it could be drainage patterns. I don't like that explanation. Hydraulic groundwater pressure. I don't know, that sounds like it could be a thing, you know, through sandy soil coming up.
So it's not an organism, it's just the soil comes up in that area?
Yeah.
Or
I don't, or it could be the gopher.
gathers in the area?
Yeah, I mean,
Speculating at this point.
yeah, we're all speculating. I mean, I actually did read some papers on it, and I feel like nobody really knows.
The gopher's the best one.
Yeah, the gopher's that's my favorite one.
What happens when you dig into one?
The soil is different. I've not personally dug into one, but it's gonna be different soil than what's next to it in different plants. Yeah, I've been on them. There's a Native Prairies Association has a conservation easement on a property that has them all over. And so you can visibly see them, but I've never taken a shovel. So, but I think the soil changes, but it's sand. When an erosion deposition, I don't think so. You know, maybe it's ancient sand dunes, seismic activity, ancient wave action, I don't think so. I mean, if you like snorkel or scuba dive or look at where oceans have retreated, they don't make little mounds like that. It could be lobster dens or something. Or aliens. So yeah, the thing that I read that I thought sounded the most logical outside of the gopher is like if you go in East Texas or in the forests of East Texas or the Southeast where you have trees and then they're kind of evenly spaced and they have like all the soil and their root ball kind of making a mound. Like maybe that used to be an ancient forest that whatever, then the trees died, but you still had the soil around them. But you know, so that's someone's assignment. Find out about human mounds.
I'll add one. I add giants to it.
Giants. Yes.
Giants actually,
Giants decided to build sand castles and they just, you know.
They wanted to have people nowadays be like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But they're little mountain.
Yeah, that's just as good as the gophers. So another thing that you get is gill guy, and that's in the shrink swell soils. And so when people came through and they were trying to farm the Blackland Prairie, they would call them hog wallows or nooner soils. And so basically, again, like in that really clayey Blackland soil, if it rains, then it's just mucky, and then if you're trying to run a plow through it, you're getting stuck. And then by noon, maybe it's dried out, and then you can't get your plow through it because it's dried out and cracking. So that's why they call it nooner soils. You can't do anything before noon, and you can't do anything after noon. And then smectite is a term for clay that's expanding the water in that soil there in the Blackland Prairies is like smectite clay. And they produce ephemeral wetlands. So gill guys, this is the opposite or inverse of the mema mounds. So the mema mounds are like mounds and the gill guys are like caves. So which creates wetlands when it rains. And so I just pulled this off of Google Earth. This that basically both of these are from that town called, I never can say its name, Saxe. Yeah. So they're in the Blackland soil, and they had kind of like a building boom not too long ago, and I was looking on Google Earth, and I was like, oh wow, look right there. There's like all this clay in this pasture right next to the houses, and you'll see in a minute, gilgai is just constantly, that soil is just constantly churning itself, and turning and turning. And so then if you build a house real quick on it, you know, you do a subdivision, you just grade it down, you don't stabilize the soil, you just put the houses out there. What I noticed when I zoomed in is the roads, which weren't that old, already had like loads of cracks in them because of the shrink swell in the soil. And then I was like, wow, I bet those people have foundation problems.
Do you know if there's an effort, like at the municipal level, to reclaim Prairie? Like, is there anything going on along those lines?
So if you look on Fort Worth, we have an open space program, and the open space program is to acquire property, and one of our goals is prairies. I mean, we're also focusing on riparian areas, but basically
Like the
acquiring
nature center is
land.
buying some of the residential.
Oh,
property
yes, and
around
then
there,
we got 30 acres that's on the outside of the nature center. We did that through open space. And so it's slowly but surely, we bought a couple of properties, and pretty much all of them are,
depresses me to hear, you know, I just.
yeah. Yes, this is what drives me every day. It's like, how can we save
Yeah.
everything? But yes, so let's see, 4 places that we've purchased so far have had prairie on them. So this is a slow crawl that we're doing it. And in 10 years, everyone's going to be talking prairie. Dang it. I'm telling you.
You got anything?
Yeah. This is all I eat, sleep, and breathe. So gilgai, this is like after a rain. That's just something I pulled off the internet. This is showing like a cross section of a gilgai and what it's doing. So it's like cracking, and then again, just turning and turning because of the shrink swell. And it's increasing biodiversity because you have different features. And so this is a cross section. I think I got that off of like an NRCS page or something, but you can see clay and a different kind of clay, and then, you know, how it changes because it's doing that. So some of the things that you find on blackland prairie soil, these are kind of like your quintessential plant groups. Long spike tridents, eastern gamma grass, Sylvius dropseed are some of your like high, you know, very important blackland prairie grasses. So if you found a prairie with these grasses, if you were the state botanist for Texas Parks and Wildlife, Jason Singhurst, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this place is amazing, we must save it. And he says that a lot. So the Sylvius dropseed plant community has global status rank of G1, meaning critically imperiled, meaning there's not going to be much of it left, and it's constantly threatened. And these are some other plants you'll find on the blackland prairie. So the yellow compass plant, so we'll see on the field trip, but it won't be flowering. It's the white compass plant, white Ross and mead. This is this tall grass friend, associate, rattlesnake master, and lost aloe. So these are not things, actually I've seen this one by Weatherford, like this on the little roadside in Weatherford. So you'll find those on tall grass prairie sites. And so this is my question, what will become of the blackland prairie? Y'all know what the answer is. It's hard to see on this, but this is just a Google Earth zoom out of Highway 380 and 75. Oklahoma's up here. All of this, Oklahoma. Take my picture underneath. I have a really nice stamp of the blackland prairie underneath, but for some reason it won't go to that. And so these are some places that you can see what's left of the blackland prairie. There are other places, but these are like kind of the bigger places you can see them. And the ebble, I had them there at the bottom. This is the NPAT prairie that I was talking about. It's 1,000 acres. It's a family property, and we have a conservation easement on it, meaning Native Prairies Association, and that's the family. And they do all kinds of like outreach and education there. with their kids and kids from school. So you can't see it. Fort Worth Prairie is the next one we're going to talk about. And in I think it was like 1901, there was a geologic surveyor. I think he was with the Geologic Service, was coming going from east to west, and he came through this area, and that's kind of the first description where someone wrote down Fort Worth Prairie, and he talked about it being distinctly different from, you know, Blackland or the cross timbers. It's 10 to 30 miles wide, so it's not very wide. It's running from basically from Gainesville down to the Brazos River. You can see it on parts of I-35, but mostly, you know, south of here on I-35, you're really looking at the Blackland Prairie. But if you go to like Lake Whitney, Weatherford, Aledo, West Fort Worth, that's not cross timbers, you're in the Fort Worth Prairie. It's quickly disappearing, which is why we have a lot of focus on Fort Worth Prairie and Native Prairie Association. And so what I did here is I just went on Google Earth and I kind of outlined. You can see where Western Cross Timbers comes in and then where Eastern Cross Timbers is. That's like used to be a dense wall of post oaks. Now it's like their houses all in there. And this is what it looks like. So you see it here at the Nature Center. You see the mollisols, which is also a clay, limey clay soil. You have your Cretaceous outcroppings of walnut shell, and then Goodland limestone. And then you have deep soils kind of at the toe slopes at the bottom, and then shallow soils on top. And then this is a really good drawing that Tony Burgess did. He was a professor at TCU before he moved to Alaska. And he really, anyone saying Fort Worth Prairie now, which the city of Fort Worth is now using that term, I'm so excited, is because of him. Because Tony basically researched Fort Worth Prairie based on Hill's 1901 survey and Dykstra Boyce, who was a US or an NRCS soil conservation range ecologist. And he, so Tony took his students, anytime he had a master's degree student, he would guide them to study the Fort Worth Prairie. So anything we know ecologically that's like in scientific literature is because of him and his students. So he was just basically showing that the Fort Worth Prairie is like the stair-step topography that's kind of unique to North Texas. It's reminiscent of the hill country, but not the same. So you have your tallgrass prairie at the toe slopes. You have seep muleys where groundwater is coming out, you know, from the porous limestone where it hits the shelves. And then you have barrens on top. And you have these hyper-seasonal seeps. So where the groundwater is coming out during the spring, it's rainy. You have certain plants that are growing there. They're very drought. They're seepy tolerant, but they're also drought adapted because those seeps dry up when it quits raining, and then these plants have to be able to withstand almost desert-like conditions later. And so this is at the Nature Center on Canyon Ridge Trail, and it's just showing kind of the bottom of a hill where you're getting more, you're kind of getting a mix of your mixed grass, little blue stem, along with some of your things that appear on prairie barrens. So this is from someone from the 1800s, and this was his description of the area. So he said, between the Brazos and Red River, there is surely the most beautiful and picturesque region I have ever beheld. I saw some of the finest timber, generally oak, not that scrubby oak which characterizes so much of the Texan territory, but large, black, and fir oaks, such as would answer all the purposes for which the largest timber is useful. Between those two rivers, no doubt, there is destined to be one of the most dense and prosperous settlements. The fertility of the soil is not exceeded by any I have seen, and from the high and undulating character of the country, there can be no doubt of its being very wealthy. So he's really kind of probably lumping Blackland Prairie, Fort Worth Prairie areas together, but obviously talking about like Dallas, Fort Worth area. This is Tony Burgess. I'm not going to click on this, but you can Google Tony Burgess Britt for Botanical Research Institute of Texas. Basically, what he did with his student at the Refuge Service Center Pine Gap on green roofs. And so what plant material, what type of green roof could they, kind of develop, and that's what ended up on the brick roof. So all of that, those are native Fort Worth Prairie barren plants. And one of the things that he was saying is like, well, there's so many gas pad sites here. If there ever comes a time that you need to restore gas pad sites, which are just limestone gravel, look at your prairie barrens. That's what you should seed with. And as I mentioned, seeds, this is part of that banding of like stair step. It's very subtle, but you have barren right here. You have seep. Then you have some little blue stems. So you can see the soil changing at each band. This is here at the Nature Center off of the Bison parking area. And they have two distinct growing seasons. So cool season with the sedges, and then warm is with your seed muling annuals. And Shannon Jones, she was one of the students, and she was also took the Master Naturalist program. And so she, provides a lot of research, the research literature for this. And then you can see at Benbrook Lake, you can see those bands if you go on Google Earth. And then there are vernal pools. So this is Becca Swadek. She was also Tony Burgess's student, and she did a study on seeps. And she was looking at vernal pools, ephemeral wetlands. Basically, I mean, if this almost looks like glades in Arkansas, in the actual Grand Prairie of Arkansas, there are these mountain glades that look like this, and they're on limestone. And in the rainy season, it literally is a wetland, but it is not a protected wetland. And so this is what happens. So I went to one of her presentations, and she was talking about that. Her study site was this amazing wetland that's not protected in any way whatsoever. So whenever, you want to put a gas station there, there was nothing to protect it. Not even the Corps of Engineers could protect it. So now it's a gas station, which makes sense. But so some of the flora that you would find, excuse me, on the Fort Worth Prairie are some of these spike rushes, these tiny little things. They, I don't have a range map on that because that was like a more recent spike rush discovery in the area. And then this is a seep muley. So you can see on this range map that the bright green is the only place you find it. Now, if you looked on iNaturalist now with more people making observations, that the range map might be a little bit different, but this is like a botanical range map. And then the pale yucca, again, it's just in this Fort Worth Prairie stretch and pretty much only in Texas. Yeah, so Brett described Heliothrus occulta in 2000, so it wasn't even in the 1999 version of the flora of North Central Texas. Some other plants, Engelmann's sage. Engelmann sage. Again, range maps, white rosin weed, which is the relative of the yellow compass plant, but this is your prairie barren species, whereas the yellow one is tallgrass species. And then summer gay feather, which was only also recently added. Again, 1999. So this is, I kind of went in and I tried to outline for the open space program what's left of the Fort Worth Prairie that's either in the city of Fort Worth or in the ETJ. And so the ETJ, so you see Fort Worth proper, lots of cement, right, and trees. And then the ETJ is the blue. And then I went in and just roughly outlined where Fort Worth Prairie is. So once that gets developed, then that's it. Then you're moving into the cross timber. So we're missing the boat if we don't get it. And then we'll have to let St. Joe or Gainesville or someone worry about setting aside some Fort Worth Prairie. And so what I figured, just again, rough, I'm not using GIS to do this. I'm just kind of using Google Earth, being lazy about it. I figure there's probably like 100,000 acres of it left in the ETJ. But since the open space program, we actually did calculations using development data and GIS and came up with it's a little bit over 50 acres of land. So that's any kind of land is developed per day in Fort Worth. And actually, I think it's per week. I think it's not per day. But that was like right before the pandemic. So then during the pandemic the number's still the same. It's like 53 now, but things are kind of slowing down because of everything going on now with rising interest rates and housing going up and land prices going up. It'll slow things down a little bit. And then this was a Fort Worth Prairie site that is becoming subdivisions. But what gets me is that we're getting rid of all the diversity. It's not included in parkland or in HOA privately maintained parkland. All we save is kind of a stream. If there's a stream, we say, okay, the 100-year floodplain won't get developed. Everything else, so like uplands, everything up from that, it gets developed, and then we put Bermuda grass down. So you take all the diversity, all those plants and animals, get rid of it, put Bermuda grass down, and then we mow it. And so I'm sorry, y'all, but I'm just PTSD. I'm like traumatized from it because I see this all the time. So this is another one. This is on Silver Creek Road, and it was, destined to become developed because it's right by 820, but it's always been this little farmhouse sitting up on a hill. And within the past year, it was like that, and then it's like that. And then when I drove by more recently, it's just all moss soil. So these are some of the places you can see Fort Worth Prairie. Fort Worth Prairie Park is something that was never an actual park, but it's something that the city of Fort Worth, open space, and other interested parties like Native Prairies and Great Plains Restoration Council still kind of have this idea of connecting more than 2,000 acres, which the Corps of Engineers would be part of that at Benbrook Lake, so into a contiguous property that can be protected, or at least contiguous protection. And of course, Nature Center. This is too hard to read. It's another thing that Tony put together, but he was just talking about, where you have Fort Worth Prairie, then it integrates into Western Cross Timbers, your soils change, your base, what's exposed changes to sand versus limey soils. And then the next one is the cross timbers. So again, sloppy Google map rendition of Eastern Cross Timbers, Fort Worth Prairie, Western Cross Timbers, and then the Carboniferous Cretaceous outcropping that's from the Pennsylvania. This is the map from Dr. Franco Biglia's book on the cast iron forest, where he was showing like kind of the original East and Western cross timbers and how they split in Texas, but then they come up and combine in Oklahoma. So savannas, that is what the cross timbers are. Eastern cross timbers is more woods. Western cross timbers is more savanna. Again, as you're going from east to west, the moisture regime is changing. And I like to say that savannas are at the forefront of the climatic battle because they're really where it's going back and forth between, is it a prairie, is it forest, what's it gonna be? And it depends on, rain and drought and long-term moisture and drought. And one thing I found interesting is like here, our savannas are live oak savanna, post oak savanna, right? Generally in this area. If you go up into the tall grass prairie up around Chicago, Illinois, and Indiana, their savannas are bur oaks. So I don't know, bur oaks are like riparian trees here, right? But once you go up there, there's enough moisture, they can move onto the uplands. They don't have to be on a stream. And so Fish and Wildlife Service, that was back in '86, so it's probably changed even more, but 99% of the original savanna has been lost. And this is from the Cast Iron Forest book also. I think he had it in there from 1832. So Washington Irving said about the cross timbers, I shall not easily forget the mortal toil and the vexations of flesh and spirit that we underwent. Occasionally in our wanderings through the cross timbers, it was like struggling through cast iron, which may be one of the derivatives of the cast iron forest was from that. But then Captain Marcy, so there's actually a book that Captain Marcy wrote back then, and it was like the settler's guide across the prairie. So they would buy, it would be like our, the internet or Lonely Planet guidebook. It was like their guidebook for heading west. And he said at 6 different points where he went through the cross timbers, he found it characterized by trees, mostly post oak, blackjack, oaks, and standing at intervals that wagons can without difficulty pass in any direction. So if you try to hike through most woods now, it's like mostly greenbrier and it's like all kinds of stuff under there. But back then, because of fire, it would have maintained a more savanna setting. So the Eastern Cross Timbers, I'll try to just go through this really quickly because y'all probably talked about this kind of stuff in your forest presentation. The Eastern Cross Timbers is mostly gentle topography, sandy soils, but it has these little iron ore nodules. And then the precipitation generally is 30 to 32 inches a year. And there's nearly 1 million acres of it. And it's, again, going up into Oklahoma and Kansas a little bit. This is what it looks like. It served as a landmark. So another expedition in the late 1700s, noted that from the Brazos River northward, you see a forest. So if you're heading north, you see a forest that's on your right, which is the Eastern Cross Timbers. And that was your guide for even the dumbest person, right? They're going to follow that and they're going to be going north. That'll keep them, there. And it was also like the Iron Curtain, right, between settlement east into Texas and the Indian country. Because once you got past the Eastern Cross Timbers, then it was like Comanche land and they were agile on their horses. So again, that's just outlining the Eastern Cross Timbers. Western Cross Timbers is larger, it's covering a larger area of 4 million acres, and it has the main belt, which is what you see here if you go on a field trip or a hike, like on the Cross Timbers trail. And it's 25 miles wide in the north, and then it's like 110 miles wide in the south. So whenever you get down around Fort Hood, Killeen, they also have Western Cross Timbers. And this is what it looks like at LBJ National Grasslands. You've got the sandy soil, have some loam. It's all in the Cretaceous, gentle topography. But then as you go a little bit further west, if you go to Bridgeport, Runaway Bay, you start going west out of there, you're getting into the fringe Western Cross Timbers, and that's steep topography. You have rockier soils. It's in the Pennsylvanian, so it's 300 million years old, and you get less precipitation. So the trees are getting shorter. They're like runty and gnarly. And then you have glades. And so I mentioned Dijksterhuis being a soil conservation service he was basically like a rangeland ecologist, and he pretty much did studies and wrote a report on the cross timbers and on Fort Worth Prairie. So if you're like want to take a deep dive into that, that's what you read, because there's no other information out there. So he went out and he interviewed ranchers. This was back in the 40s. So the ranchers, some of them would have been like born in the 1800s. So he was able to find out from them firsthand, what the fringe looked like. There was no undergrowth. There was like tall grasses. There were glades, savannas, and that fires were common because we weren't suppressing them. And then we have even ancient cross timbers. And so here at the Nature Center, there are some ancient cross timbers. Did y'all talk about it or look at it on your field trip by chance? Okay, so if you're just ever hiking around out here and you go on the cross timbers trail, the post oaks that are there on that it's like a really like sweet sandy soil. And at the water table, those post oaks, they got poured in 1980 by a dendrochronologist, and he's like a leading dendrochronologist who's looking at climate by studying tree rings. And he came out in 1980, he poured those trees. And this was all by hand, so they didn't even have GPS back then. They were just like hand mapping. You can find some of those trees. You wouldn't know that you've seen them. They're only about this big. And I think the oldest one dated to like, I might have it on here, like 1736 or something. Like he could read the tree rings. He can read the climate. There was a fire in this year. There was a drought in this year. There was heavy rainfall. They had 2 growing seasons in this year. And that's like, 1736. Like that's on cross timbers. If you hike that trail, you wouldn't be able to find the trees, but they're there. Anything that's like 25-inch DBH can be as old as that. And so just talking about trees, because savannas, this tree fell. It's a post oak. It fell in Decatur, and I was like driving by and I'm like, stop. I have to look at that tree. Look how huge it is, right? And so it was in the city of Decatur right-of-way, their roadway right-of-way. So I accosted them. I literally called like city of Decatur, and I'm like, I want that tree. I want a tree cookie out of it. So when they went to cut and remove the tree, they cut me a tree cookie, and I sanded it. I mean, the thing probably weighed 300 pounds. I sanded it and I put dates. I counted the rings, and then I wrote like a report. And then I took that tree ring back to the city of Decatur and fousted it upon them, because it's like they could put that in City Hall or something, I counted, it was like 246 years or something, as far as I could count before it rotted out in the center. And I had the city forester come count too. So we were sure of that. And then this is, greenhouse volunteers. We went out to cross timbers and found maybe 4 of those trees that were surveyed. But it's really hard without GPS. So these are some of the plants that you can see in the Western cross timbers: bay feather, goldenrod, fimbristylis, that's like early season, and then spotted bee balm. These are kind of your classic sandy soil cross timbers: the bee balm, spotted bee balm, and butterfly weed, and green milkweed. And of course, here at the Nature Center, you have Glen Rose yucca, which has a very limited range. It's also at Southwest Nature Preserve. But here, because of the deer, we had to fence it so that we could collect seed. You have to see this stalk grow up before you can identify whether it's Glen Rose or Arkansas yucca. And then we submitted that to the state seed bank in case they all disappear. So some of the other plants: buffalo grass, hairy grama, purple tridents. And then if y'all know what this plant, this is like a classic cross timber plant. Yeah. Yeah. I know, isn't that awful? Like, that was off the internet, and I was just like, that baby's dead. That baby's dead. I hate to oh. So these are some places you can see cross timbers. At the bottom, I have where you can see fringe cross timbers. And so now I think you'll have a good handle on the prairies in this area. I'm just going to cover some prairie management because, you know, it's in the whatever the Master Naturalist book. It's how do you steward or manage prairies. Well, we know that humans have used fire to manage prairies for a long time. This is, you know, a famous painting that's at the Kimball. So they were, you know, using it as a fire management tool or a land management tool. Is that good? Is that bad? Do we care? What do you think they were using fire for back then? I'm just going to assume it's command and control.
Driving. No, they were driving.
Yeah, I think probably mostly because if they burn it, then in a couple of days, it's going to grain up. Then your prey, your bison, who they would be hunting, would be coming in to eat the new growth. And you can see that with cows now. If there's like a fire and cows are on a pasture, they'll like go nutso on all that green grass. So some of the benefits for a prairie is if you do a prescribed burn, it's like reducing the fuel load, which would have been handy over the summer when things were burning. You reduce the thatch, so that's giving more of a chance for what's under to grow. You're adding nutrients back into the soil, it's stimulating new growth. So it's like another version of bison grazing. It's equalizing the competition for resources. So if you kind of have like a clean slate, then any seeds that happen to fall or didn't get burned up, plus all the perennials can kind of come back and compete equally in a way. And you can remove woody species. So a lot of burns in this area, prescribed burns, happen in the winter because it's more of like a safe, everything's dried out, you can have better control of fires. But if you're trying to burn out woody species, you're not really doing much when you do a winter burn. It would be better to do a summer burn, but summer burns are hot. Sometimes we're in a drought. Burns also would create a mosaic, so that increases diversity. So this fire, if you're using it, you want to look at, well, the seasonality. When are you going to burn? What's the intensity going to be? Do you want it intense? Do you want it light? What's the frequency? Because all of those things are going to determine what the species response is. So if you're trying to kill cedar, maybe you burn, you know, you can burn in the winter and get those things to torch and it'll kill them. But if you're worried about like pollinators and a diverse wildflower area, you want to look at when you would burn, and you don't want to burn like everything because you're burning up the next season's pollinator food, but maybe they're caterpillars and whatever. So I thought this was interesting. This is fire intervals. So this was, I think it was like NRCS or someone that did a study and looking at fire intervals. And so historic, I always thought like, I don't know, 20 years or something, you might have a fire burn through a prairie area, but basically they're saying right here from us all the way down to the Gulf Coast was like every 2 years. So it would have been just naturally occurring from lightning strikes. And then you can read, okay, well, that's the Great Plains, that's grass, that's a grassland. But then it's colder up here. So you would have had a shorter fire season. And then you can, I don't know, you can just look at what they're saying the fire interval is, and you can tell what vegetation just by looking at the map. And this is just some of the things you would consider if you're going to do a prescribed burn. This is just like a really basic like square burn. And so So like when they do prescribed birds here at the Nature Center, they're writing like a management plan, you're monitoring the weather, you're looking at soil moisture and the plants, what's the wind doing, you have to write this big document. And so these are some of the things, you know, to look at is field moisture, relative humidity, temperature, the topography, what are your goals, what's the reason you're doing it, what's the wind speed and direction. And if, you know, you have a predicted wind speed and direction and then you light a fire and then the wind changes, maybe a front's coming through, you better wrap it up or cut it off because that's how some really bad prescribed birds turn into wildfires. And then you want to look at what equipment and personnel you have and safety. And what is the potential fire behavior in the fuel fluid. So this is just like, again, a ring fire where they're lighting the flank, you know, let it burn because they're burning, the wind's blowing, I assume out of the south, blowing that way. So they're lighting that top corner first. So to make a big black line, then they get down here, they came around, they had two people going either direction, they come down here, then these two guys meet in the middle, they set the head fire. It's done. And then you want to see if there are burn bans in effect. So this is just like data collection. The other thing that you could use as a management tool would be grazing. So rotational grazing, flash grazing, it's going to do the same thing that the bison would have done. And this is just an example of, you know, like an area with good grass, and an area that's overgrazed. So you want to pull cattle or bison off of that one because it's deep down. You can use mowing and haying. So you don't want to just do one management type. If you want to improve diversity, you want to do a suite of things. And, you know, over years, you could do mowing, haying, fire, and do rotations. And then what's really a problem here at the Nature Center, as well as lots of parks in Fort Worth and Arlington, et cetera, is privet. And so that's another land management tool because privet's invading prairies, it's invading riparian areas, and it's really hard to get rid of. So there are different ways you can get rid of it. Pull it with a skid steer, weed wrenches, which I don't recommend if you have acres because that just hurts your back. Cutting and herbiciding. And then this is from Tandy Hill's Brush Bash, where we spent weeks chainsawing trees and privet and herbiciding it. And then volunteers came and drug it. And it was like very labor intensive. I just calculated how much time we spent on that. We spent 13 years on 14 acres. And now we're writing a grant to basically hire a forestry mulcher that can do, so 14 acres, we can do 50 acres in a week with no back problems. So hopefully we'll get that grant and kill some privet. So if you do use herbicide, and, you know, especially for the city, we have to fill out herbicide records and track it, and we get monitored, you know, by the state. And these are just different ways to treat. But here's the shredding forestry mulcher. These are really big machines. They seem very radical, but if you're trying to make or return a prairie to a prairie, you might need these machines. So this is not in Fort Worth. This is out in Vice County at LBJ National Grasslands. And they got a grant for improving upland game bird habitat. And so they forestry mulched, like, I don't even know what they're up to, probably 2,000 acres now. And that's improving, returning it to a savanna so that it's attracting back your turkey, your quail, your, you know, all of your savanna species. And then at the Nature Center, I think they've been using a forestry mulcher or shredder or something more recently, but, you know, years ago it was like, I don't know if y'all know Suzanne Tuttle, she used to be the manager here, but, you know, it's like with a chainsaw, you get 1 acre done, but you've used a chainsaw and herbicide. And this is on Oakmont Trail. So that's the savanna restoration here on Oakmont Trail. And then, another management thing, especially here at the Nature Center, is the greenhouse. So collecting seed, growing out plants, if you can purchase seed from locally sourced vendors, salvaging. We did that at Chisholm Trail Park before a soccer field went in. Again, here at the Nature Center, you can grow containerized plants, you outplant them, you can weed their roots. And then veg surveying. So I think the Nature Center is still doing veg surveys. We set up like some, I'm sorry?
I just worked on something a couple weeks ago.
Okay, are you doing it for the fire effects? That's what it was set up originally, to do fire monitoring. Okay. It may be for that. It could be in the bison range, like looking at bison, like plant response to pulling bison off or whatever.
I think they were just looking to see what was where and like to compare to.
Okay.
She was gonna enter it all into all that.
Maybe.
database.
That's pretty anal. I'm a big, I love to do like research, like collect data.
Yeah.
So I made something really insane here that probably no one could even follow. So also some of the threats, we're just moving on to threats, could be to prairies would be fences. Do y'all know why a fence would be a threat to a prairie?
Aggressive.
I'm sorry.
Fauna, entering and exiting of like fauna that would eat and maintain.
Edge. Yeah, that would be edge. That would really be like in pronghorn country because they don't jump fences. So they have to go under or through a fence. Also, it's just a place for birds to perch. So if you're driving down the road and you see a lot of trees on a fence line, it's because it's probably going to be a hackberry, and it's because birds ate hackberry fruit and then sat on the fence and pooped it out. So that just creates an enclosing and an edge effect. And then also just invasive species that's up in Oklahoma, with the eastern red cedar just going nuts. You also have invasive species like privet, Johnson grass, feral hogs. And the suppression of fire is a threat to a prairie because prairies have evolved with fire, and you need fire in order to return diversity to an area. But also we see what happens like in out in Palo Pinto area. It used to be a grassland. It's more like a savanna, western cross timber savanna area. So it would have been more open, but by suppressing fire, all the juniper moved in. And then when you have really extreme droughts and then that juniper stress, it has volatile oils. And when it's stressed and you get fire and wind, then you get catastrophic wildfires that no firefighter will be able to easily protect the homes. And of course, agriculture, erosion, overgrazing. This was from Parks and Wildlife. He was the state entomologist. And so he just went all over the state looking at like, pollination potential and then overgrazing. And so these are his pictures of like, okay, if you put goats, people put goats out maybe because they like them and they're adorable, but also for an ag exemption. So if you don't manage the goats, they'll browse everything. They're browsers. They'll eat trees and then create a line. But then when they run out of that food, then they start eating, what's on the ground. So you can see the right of way had a lot of stuff, and that poor goat's like, no one over there. And then someone mentioned edge effect. That is detrimental to a prairie, also to a forest. It's better to have contiguous habitat. Edge effect is good, but in moderation. And then, of course, energy production is a threat, and it's becoming more of a threat, oddly, more recently. Wind turbines are going up everywhere, and that's good. We want to be reliant on ourselves and on nature and green by 2030 and all of that. But I think, and this is my personal opinion, that we're rushing into it without thinking what are the side or the consequences of it, because there are some prairies that are now going to become solar farms. So that means this prairie that the Parks and Wildlife State Biologists and Native Prairies Association knows and says like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing remnant prairie. It's like the most spectacular prairie. It's like 1,000 acres in Northeast Texas. And of course, the person who owns it, like they want to monetize it, you know, you can't blame them. But they basically, it's just going to become a solar farm. So it's like, is there a way that we could thoughtfully have renewable energy and not destroy our native ecosystems? Because in the end, if we're trying to be more climate resilient, that's not going to help if we're destroying everything. You know, in order to have green energy, we have to protect what we have here, because that's also the removal that's affecting the climate as well. So that's just wind farms down on the coast. And then urban expansion, which I already talked about. Oh, and also mowing regimes. So I've been in my little bubble for years in conservation. I worked out here. I worked for the Nature Conservancy, National Park Service. I was in my little conservation bubble. And then I moved over to the Parks Department, Park Operations, where it's just mow this, mow. And they're actually listening to me. So we've created vegetation buffers. We've created reduced mow areas, wildflower areas. So we are changing it a little bit, but still a lot of parks are just maintained, you know, like that. And it's not just Fort Worth, it's all cities. That's our aesthetic. But there's room for different types of management. And then this, because I'm on the open space committee, I'm looking at these things all the time. Also, it's like, that's the city of Fort Worth boundaries. This is the ETJ. But I was just kind of looking at like how each of these cities are growing. Like, so that's all DFW, but then these little outliers like Rome and Decatur and Weatherford and Aledo, they're all growing because Fort Worth is growing. And, you know, weird towns northeast of Dallas that I've never even heard of that are 30 miles outside of the furthest extent of Dallas, they're growing because people want to live in these places. So I feel like it's really important, not just as a city of Fort Worth, but regionally, that we need a conservation, like a regional conservation program, because if we don't, we're not going to have a lot of open space and parks. And so that's where y'all come in, because y'all are master naturalists. So you're either already know a lot of this, but you're also learning. And that's part of the battle, is the deficit of knowledge and education of prairies, but also of riparian areas of nature in general, and our loss of a sense of wonder and place. You know, is that translating? I see a lot of younger people in here, and I'd love to hear everyone's backgrounds and why you signed up for Master Naturalist. But then I have to wonder, like, are we teaching kids now that are in first grade and fourth grade and whatever, are they getting exposed to nature, or are we all just in our cell phones? Because that's what's gonna protect areas. But some other things besides just having knowledge, you can, you know, do conservation plates with Parks and Wildlife, because that money goes directly back to conservation. Prairie Seekers, which is the program with Native Prairies Association of Texas, where we train people on prairies and how to assess them, and then get to go to cool places. And we collect data and put it on iNaturalist. And then open space. So that's what I've been talking about. This is the land that's right across the river from the Nature Center, and the regional vision plan calls for everything that's overlooking. Like literally, you go out here, you go to the river, you look on the other side, they're like, let's put like high-end houses there, which I think really will reduce the feel of that you're out somewhere when you come here.
When it says sustainable, what does that mean?
Well, you know, whatever, I don't know. I'm being cynical because I know the city and I know how we work, so. Yeah, so they'll, by that, they probably mean, single family, high end, larger yards.
Not trailers.
Yeah, large, yeah, like really expensive
So it's
houses
not
probably,
gonna
but
be
then they would
native
put,
grasses and native flowers and berries.
Probably- probably
that's
not,
why
but
they-
maybe that could happen, you know, but that's not what they mean. They mean, basically what they mean is, probably if they could get LEED certified stuff in there and then, multi-family, multi-use. So, you know, like when you go to downtown Fort Worth or big cities, it's multi-use, right? It's like you have businesses and apartments and da. So I think that's what they mean is you would do a combination of all of those things in an area.
I went to a place in Mexico, an eco resort, and it was in the national forest, almost to Belize. And the rule, you could build in there, but you can only build on 10% of the land. So any roads or buildings had to be in that 10%, and the other 90% they had to leave intact. And I thought why can't we just globally apply that?
Yeah.
Any new building, you know?
There's no money in that.
Yeah.
Well, we can't eat the freaking money. You know, I mean,
That's true.
That's what it all comes down to. At the end of the day, is money.
that's not
Yeah.
gonna last.
For that
It's
one
not
reason, that's for that
sustainable.
one
It is
reason.
not
It's
sustainable.
not.
It is unsustainable.
And I
And that
think-
is gonna be,
And then this
Our
is why I
grandkids are
like
gonna-
to talk about this and like pre-ordinances is because like, any of you could work for a city, you could get on a park board, you could get on city council, you could talk to your whatever, you know, engage with city leaders because all of those kind of decisions on zoning, it all comes down to zoning. And of course, the property owner, again, we don't want to penalize the property owner from getting the most out of their property, but it does
Maybe
come
we-
back
we're
to
gonna
like
have to. I think we're gonna-
ordinances and policies. That's what I've learned in my position. And I feel like a mole that I'm in that position because I'm helping with policies and ordinances.
She is the best person to have.
Thank you. I mean, people are like, oh God, it's Michelle. I'm sure I've heard that muttered a few times in people's breath. But I work with development services a lot, so they hear from me. And so this is kind of a parting thought, I guess, is like, you know, would you frame a picture of a clear-cut forest in your living room? Like, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. That looks amazing. Like, I want that over my couch. But and I'm guilty of this too, like, you know, go into the Midwest or something, you're like, look at that cornfield, it's so beautiful. Or look at that wheat field. But that's like, that means that your native prairies and your native forests have been decimated. So y'all probably do not want to come into my world, honestly, because the more that I learn, the more I'm like, oh, stop, blinders, put blinders on. There's a good Aldo Leopold quote that, and I can't even paraphrase it and do it justice, but it's like, the more you know, the more you like are sad because you see things happening to what you know and love. But again, I'm going back to Tony Burgess because I thought after all that he's done through his life, he lived to be like maybe 78 or so. He just had a good disposition. And what it was is he advocates for the preservation of native biodiversity. To some people, this advocacy seems eccentric. And I admit that if you care about the natural world, you can feel hurt by what people do to it. So I try to channel my concern into projects that help people reconnect with the living landscapes that surround them. And like, oh my gosh, I just love Tony Burgess. He was just so wise. And that's what he was doing. And so that's what I hope to impart through presentations and to y'all, like, and it doesn't have to be about prairies, like whatever you care about, whatever that is, it doesn't matter. If you just impart your enthusiasm to other people, you're like spreading love, right? You're spreading joy and knowledge about that thing that you care
Anger
about.
though, I get mad.
Don't spread it.
I know, it's that's not.
Yeah, you have to translate that, and that's with anything. If something is like upsetting you and making you angry, what is like a positive way you can spin it around to make positive effect? And I feel like I'm still just that much naive still, that I think you can still do good in the world. But anyways.
Well, I'll play the devil's advocate. Where are we gonna put all these people? It's great to have, and I love nature more than anyone, well, as much as you all, but where are you gonna put all these people? We're growing so fast as a society and a world, that where are we gonna put people? And now there's our question, we're talking about saving all that land.
Yeah.
If you live inside town like I do,
Yeah.
we're sitting on top of each other now.
Right. And then
So what do? Less kids? Do we say you can have one child? You know, you go like China? Or what? I think you have to kind of go back and look at it at that level. And we have to say to ourselves is, what are we gonna do? Because we're just growing.
yeah.
You have to live somewhere.
Urban
Yeah.
planners have adopted a more vertical, I mean, this is urban, not suburban, a more vertical.
Yeah.
There's a word orientation.
Yeah.
And we are gonna be relative experts in this. And I was living in Austin when we passed a very strict tree ordinance. And it was largely a grassroots effort. One of them, a good friend of mine. So it is possible to do a lot better than we are now. And we should have some sort of rebate system for homeowners to minimize their yard, you know, their monoculture grass.
Yeah.
I have about a half acre, and we have in the eastern clusters, we have eradicated almost all our non-natives, and we're encouraging the natives. We have a little tiny patch of grass, but there should be incentives, and I don't think we do. And people think we have to have this monoculture of grass and European style gardening, which takes more money away from, you know, it costs going to cost the city and homeowners more to maintain.
Yeah, and you have the side, not benefits, the side effects, you know, that are negative side effects of like air pollution, noise pollution,
Fertilizer runoff.
Yeah, like, anyways, I'm sure we could all name it, but it's not, the thing is nothing that's simple, right? Because everything's interconnected. And I always just go back to like, I think just from working for the city, but I've worked for the federal government also and nonprofits, I'm really convinced that the most impact you can have is on the local level. You can't do much about, you know, federal or, you know, national politics or this or that, but you can make a difference in your community. And so I feel like it just kind of boils back down to there because, I mean, like, Kenneth and I are city employees, right? And you're talking to us and we can take those ideas and we can work on that. And if you go to whatever town you live in and talk to staff there and also vote, you know, for whatever, that's going to make a big difference because they're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your family, yes.
I guess on the topic of like what landowners can do, is there any sort of like grants or funding that you can get, like especially if you think you have like part of a remnant prairie, like to maintain it, or like for people that I guess are starting from the ground up, but especially like on my parents' land, I think we have a remnant prairie. So there's like a way to like get money because it can be really expensive to get.
Yes. So I guess the easy answer is go to your NRCS office and talk to them first, because NRCS, that's the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They're like the old soil conservation service. They have regional biologists for whatever county biologist. And they would know, like, it also depends on the size of the property and what programs there are, but there are cost share programs that a landowner could get into for restoration and different things. So that would kind of be the first one. And then you could go from there. I'd say start with that. I think that, well, that was it. I'm done. Let's go have questions. Very people.
How do we get on a park where, how do we implement like our neighborhood park as far as any wildfire areas or no things like that?
Are you in Fort Worth or yes? Oh, then just talk to you. Because we're do what?
People are beautiful is always looking for people to get on that.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, you start there, talking to people in the city or county that you live in, and find out if you can serve. So there's actually, it was last year or the year, I think it was last year's Master Naturalist group. One person is on the part of the city, the park board, and I didn't realize that. I don't know if he became on the park board after you know, the Master Naturalist, or if he was on it at the time, but like he's like asking for some stuff, you know, and it's based on his knowledge of that from Master Naturalist. So I'm like, man, if you get on a park board or you get on council or a committee or something, then you have more of a voice. And then also the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So if you're really annoying to like a city official, eventually they're gonna have to like do something, you know, like compromise or something.
So who owns the land along the highways between like Weatherford and Fort Worth? That's not like a Ligo or whatever. So I was driving from Villafranca, South Fort Worth, back out to Weatherford today, and on both sides of the highway, it had grown up and was looking really nice, and it was full of milkweed. You can see all the milkweed. And guess what was happening when I drove by? They were mowing it all down. And we're like 3 or 4 weeks away from the monarch migration.
Yeah.
They're threatened, and all that beautiful habitat and the plants that these creatures need are now, they're gone.
Yes.
Okay, so who owns?
So that's TxDOT. And you know, TxDOT, Lady Bird Johnson, she advocated for that. And TxDOT has their mowing regime in tune to that. And they're, you know, I mean,
No, they don't, because they mowed all those milkweed plants today, right when the butterflies see them.
so, but what I think they do is I don't know if it's like subcontract out to the county. So I think that they go, okay, this part of the road goes through Parker County. Parker County, you handle the mowing through contractors. So I would contact TxDOT, find out who the regional person is, because they actually have biologists on staff, and ask them about that. And then I'd call the county. I've done that before. And
even if I don't live in Tarrant County?
I think you can do it no matter. You're using, yeah.
Not in Tarrant County.
Yeah. And you're using the roadway, and so they don't have to know you're not from Tarrant County. I would track someone down and just I mean, you don't have to be a jerk about it, but just say, hey, I was driving this time. This is what happened. This is why I think it's important that you alter your mowing. So, and see what they say, and then go from there.
I think Lady Bird Johnson rolls with her grade.
Yeah,
I think she
I really do.
Yeah, it's
yeah. Oh yeah, because it's like, oh, anyways.
Yeah. Like a month.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're coming through now too, and everything's all wonky from the drought. So yeah, but I think if they hear, you know, and you don't want to sound like crazy cat lady or whatever, or crazy fairy lady. So, you know, approach it measured so that they're not like, oh, this person. Because they'll listen, I think.
I could speak to the TxDOT thing. So if you have issue with the TxDOT, the Fort Worth district for Parker County and Tarrant County, Wise County, Palo Pinto, ERAF, Hood and Johnson to Somerville, the area, the district for that is out of Fort Worth off of Cart. So contact them. And then usually it's up to the county level to, I believe, to maintain the mowing, but the main coordination's out of the district office. So they can put you into contact, because she's right that some of it can be TxDOT personnel, but some of it's also contracted because you've got so much right away.
Yeah. And actually, one of our City of Fort Worth employees, she helped with she worked for the environmental and the water department. And so she was an educator, and she got a job with TxDOT. So that something happened in Wise County where they were just like, they had this boom truck and they were just like herbicide. They're just spraying everything. And I was like, oh my God. Like, I'm a licensed pesticide applicator, but like just spraying the snot out of, what are they doing? So I emailed her, and then she put me in touch with like the county, whatever. And that's what it was. They had, sent it to the county. So he had to answer me. And I haven't seen them doing it again, but I don't know if I saved the world, but at least I wrote a long email, lining out what they were doing and why I thought that maybe they should. Yeah, but I wasn't a jerk. Yes.
I just want to share something with everyone.
Oh no.
You have to know, that we think differently, and people think about feeding their families, because we all do as well. Ignorance is bliss. Okay, a lot of people don't want to hear the truth, but oftentimes the truth will set you free. They just don't want to hear it, and unfortunately, the amount of workers and people that they have to coordinate to go and mow, there's a lot of logistics that go into that, and the milkweed is the least of their consideration because they want to live in that ignorance. And they know that they have to mow 4 times a year.
Oh, they mow that strip a lot more than 4 times a year.
Well, that's minimum.
Yeah.
But that's just the world we live in.
Oh, I've been around a long time. I get that. But
It's super frustrating.
The
It's
monarch
super
butterfly is
frustrating.
also our state insect too. So
But approaching people with anger is just going to make them run further.
Yeah. No, you're.
I agree. Yeah. But showing anger. No.
I was just asking questions, so I'm not sure I'm getting singled out here.
I thought you were gonna say, or maybe you still are, like I work for
I just wanted to know who to contact. I wasn't angry.
Well,
I was.
Yes.
I used to work. And they were mowing, plowing.
But you're right.
And one day the mayor said, we had a big week of Parks and Rec. We want to be a butterfly city. What do we have to do? And then they researched, we can plant milkweed. Mowing that, it's like, just don't mow it. So then she had them planted, should have mowed it, and
If the
then they
village is
became
in
a
charge, then
Yeah.
it would be a good place.
Yeah, they're like
people just don't know.
carrots and tools or whatever. So again, like I call the job that I'm in the anti-Michelle, because it's like the opposite of everything I've done my whole career. But I've taken that and turned it into how can we get wins out of that. So like our department, we mow, I call it, we mow the snot out of stuff. And, so within any city and a park department, if there's one employee or someone advocating for that, you can set aside reduced mow areas, butterfly areas, all it takes is a public outreach campaign. Say this area, we're mapping this area out, we're not going to mow it. And I agree with you on the contractors because we deal with that all the time. I went out and my colleagues went out and we marked and we did maps and we put signs in for a reduced mow area for a stream buffer. And the contractors that mow the rest of the park, they just went back and they mowed it all over. They mowed over what we literally took them out there and walked with them and said, don't mow this. So you have to keep at it.
So the solution to that is when you're writing your contract, put a provision in there, if they go into the no-mo area, then they don't get paid.
Yeah, that might work.
There's been some state agencies that have done that.
Really?
Yeah.
I like. I'll mention that.
They don't
Really
have
good
time to
idea.
think. So,
I have a thought that's kind of funny. I used to live in Kerrville and I was friends with the lady that started, her name was Susan as well. She started the nature center there for Riverside Nature
Yeah, I
Center.
have been there.
And that's her child. But her house there, she was going out of town and she said, well, I was gonna water for her when she was gone. And she told me the street address and then she said, well, it's on the right, you'll see it. Well, then I didn't know what to expect, but I drive down the street and there's neat house, clean mowed, little flower. Oh my gosh, it looked like the Addams family, like compared to the rest of the neighborhood. Because I know I drive my neighborhood crazy, but I mean, it was just like so, like just, I can't describe it. Beautiful to a naturalist, but a nightmare to the neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have to like kind of look at different.
From the stray cat
Yeah, it's always good to mingle with people that don't have the same viewpoint, because like, you learn from that. Do y'all have any other questions?
I would just like to say, we should help us all sleep at night. There's no other-
She's out there.
If y'all remember. So on the field trip, can I send it out to like, what is it, CTMN?
Class 2022 at CTMN.
Okay, I'll send out the instructions because I'm also thinking about the field trip. So, but just to give you a heads up for at least part of it, I know, is at Rock Creek Ranch Park, which is a new park. It has a lot of history. It has like going back to the Texas land grant. And it's 300 acres. It has a stream. It has fossils. It has historic features and a house that we acquired that I don't think we're going to get to go to the house. So that being said, we don't have toilets there. So allow to stop somewhere to go to the restroom that morning if you drink coffee or whatever. And we're going to be hiking. So we can't drive anywhere. We don't have ATVs. It's going to be all hoofing in it. So if anyone has an issue that they're not able to hike far, then I guess email me and then I'll figure something out. And then we'll want to bring lunch. We're going to be bushwhacking probably. So don't wear shorts. Please don't wear shorts and flip-flops. You'll probably be okay, but please don't.
Where is this actually walking for?
Several miles. So
We're not like 10.
I'll try not to.
Are we gonna be there all day?
So what I haven't decided, but I mean, we'd have a lunch, and what I would say is bring a lunch, but it's not really that far from restaurants and stuff. But I'm thinking I might just split it and we'll go there in the morning. We'll have our lunch break. You do whatever, then we go to the next spot.
Because I'm just a little concerned about being out there all day with no bathroom.
Oh, yes.
Not that I'm not going to the bathroom, but there's a whole lot of people.
I know.
So.
And if you drink coffee, it's bad, right?
Right,
Like
right.
I'm always like, oh my gosh, I gotta stop before I get there. So it's in South Fort Worth. It's off 1187. So like way South Fort Worth, kind of Crowley area. So there are restaurants, like there's a Starbucks within 2 miles or something. Yeah, they have restrooms. They don't mind if you use the restroom. But yeah, so whenever I email out, if someone has like a concern, email me back and I'll take that into account of how I schedule the day. We do have trails mowed out there, but one of our staff that we lined out the trails, and he was the one that mowed it. He got hurt, so they're short-staffed. Hopefully we'll have our trails mowed, and that's what we'll use. So Did I forget anything? I want y'all to be able to leave here before 9. So
Yes, and bring plenty of water, please.
yes.
There probably will be issues like they have here, so please bring more than 1 container of water.
Yeah, and a hat.
We spoiled dog today.
Yeah, that's true because it's like you can go, and you, but yeah, at other places. Like,
Thank you so much.
Two quick things for me and then one from Melinda. Has a box of like Arkansas quartz that someone brought in and donated to the nature center, and they had quite a few extras. So if anybody wants to go take a little quartz home from Arkansas, you can. They're in a box on the table. And then this is totally random, but on Friday night at 8:30 p.m. Mineral Wells is having a bat walk, for $7, and I'm going. And so if anybody wants to go, Friday at 8:30. I'm going. So if anybody wants to go, I'm just going by myself. I'll be there if you're free to go do things alone. I do all the things alone. But
reservation either.
no, you just pay $7.
I have a couple of them scheduled in October also. I'm already planning. I took the Sunday off. That's right around Halloween, the 30th. Because usually I work Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I already requested that day off. So that.
Cool.
This one's just in the middle of downtown Mineral Wells.
Yeah.
So it's not out of Mineral Wells State Park. It was just in downtown Mineral Wells. It's at 8:30 p.m. on Friday.
Yeah, it's right around there.
Yeah. I'll share it on the Facebook page and in the class email. And again,
And you don't have to have reservation.
no, just $7 tickets, I think.
Okay, and a couple of quick things. First of all, again, anybody, I hate to ask, I feel like I asked I do ask every week, let's face it. Anybody want to bring snacks next week? Do we have anybody that wants to volunteer? 1, 2, 3, something, and I'll probably bring something. And then one other quick thing is every year we have a class representative that we have that goes to or that attends our board meetings, and it's kind of like a contact person for the class. Yes, and the committee and I we were discussing it, and we actually asked Erica if she'd be willing to do it, and she accepted. So any problems you have, don't come to me, come to her. No, I'm joking. But anyway, she's going to be you guys class representative, so she'll be attending the board meetings and everything. And also, if anybody else is interested in opportunities with the board, we frequently have options out there. If anybody, I think we're still looking for treasurer and different things. If anybody is interested. And there was one other thing I was going to say. Huh? Yeah. I don't think you do. Well, I think you have to go through your initial training, but you don't have to have your certification yet. I think you can still start on the board, which is Evan started. Yeah. And then the other thing, I was going to just mention one more time, because I know I mentioned at the very beginning, if anybody is talented, has a talent, I've been asked again to mention, if anybody wants to, we do have slots open for the Christmas party coming up. If anybody plays an instrument, wants to do something fun, just throwing it out there. I don't expect anybody to take me up on it, but I'm just throwing it out there again. So that's all. So we'll see. There you go. There you go. We can get a band together. You guys can get a band together. I mean, I'm sure there's enough talent.
And that sounds like super lame, but it was very fun.
That might be really good. Do you guys want to organize a lip sync battle as from the class? That'd be really awesome. Who would be interested? Do you want to be the contact person? You want to be the contact person? You want to be a contact person?
Yeah. I'll post on Facebook.
Okay. That'll be fun. And next week is invertebrates. So there's a chapter in the book on invertebrates. So that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Did you enjoy?
Yeah, Get it going, girl. Get it going. I don't know how to poetry now, but you're the head on this one.